Chapter 29. The carved mantle muzzles sank their teeth into Zelda's wrists as Lena and Audrina ratcheted the tie-down straps as tightly as her bones would yield short of snapping. She twisted violently against the fireplace, held back by more horses' leathers pilfered out of the stable, a futile protest which only succeeded in severing her figure's last concealment from the warriors. They had already beheld everything beneath the watery silt, just another landscape of Hyrule. Vistas the Queen held as warden but could not claim as her own.
"This is unforgivable,"
she raged as the women pulled back just outside of her berth, an infinitesimal circumference of hearth and mantle that her tethered body could reach. Even in this blind, incoherent furor the words felt as laughable to her ears as they did to the soldiers, who side-eyed each other in flashes of mirthful, dancing green delight. The only unforgivable person in this chamber had been, and always would be, Zelda. They let her shriek and curse them like a wound-up toy, rattling as the finite torque finally sputtered, leaving her heaving and breathless. The stirred ashes from the firebox began to rise, sending her into a coughing fit that strained her neck against the pen of jewels that only seemed to grow tighter. At last she slumped, sinking herself into the ensnarement, letting the trap she'd sketched with her own hand suspend her above the gullet of a destiny her exhausted will could not fight. Lena knelt on one knee, sinking down to Zelda's shallow eye level. Lifting a single finger, she ran it behind her ear, setting loose the thread that kept her veil draped across her face. It now fell, revealing a woman just as astonishing as she would have dreamed, plump, naturally pink lips curved up and kissing a beauty mark anchoring a right dimple. She appeared younger than she had assumed, no older than Riju. They could be sisters. That same finger traced the line of Zelda's jaw, halting just below her chin, which she raised with an effortless tick.
"Goodbye, sweet princess,"
she whispered.
"It's been such gratifying entertainment to watch you these many months. Now, may your goddess in the sands have mercy on your miserable soul."
Footsteps approached. Too far down the hall, too far to be this detectable. This felt. Lena rose back up in a swift lean on her spear, and then they vanished behind the door, their small feet swallowed by the drawing tempest. The Demon King's eyes glowed with red malice. Zelda could swear she felt the stone of the floor quake as he heaved ragged, furious breath, his hands curled into talons at his side. For the briefest moment the edges of her vision blurred in a fuchsia haze, a disembodied echo of a time that wasn't her own. A roar shaking the tower, shattering glass, crumbling a mighty fortress to rubble in one last crush of spite. Ganondorf. Pitiful man. His teeth flashed in a snarl, wiped of the usual self-satisfied delight. Instead, he drew up his claws, seething as those unholy crimson irises flicked between them and the trapped queen at the mantle. Livid but calculating, all too aware of how devastating and irreversible his reaction could be if heaved against his delicate prize. So he too was bound to his lies, damned to the endless measure and balance along the fringe of his ultimate design falling to pieces. Empty, echoing comfort now, in the ruins of their shared artifice. Instead, he channeled the rage into the wall beside her, his fist pummeling the stone into plumes of dust and mortar. She winced, squirming as far as she could from him in her tiny spectrum of movement, the force of his might quaking her to the core. It was the reaction he wanted, but not nearly enough. He wrapped his unscathed fingers around the intricate marble, right above her elbow. She heard the dull crack of sculpted flower blossoms snapping in his grip, while his wall of a chest caved around her like a sarcophagus.
"You wretched Hylian whore,"
he spat, reeking with hatred left to rot in the sun for all the tens of thousands of years, smeared against every other Princess Zelda he'd known through the stretching spirals of history. She inhaled what she was aware could be her last breath, rich with creosote and leather, drawing up the length of her spine. "You will not die slumped and cowering." She swore she heard her father from behind her, whispered in the walls. "Stand in your honor, princess."
"I have done nothing, but serve you faithfully,"
she said, the conviction's truth steadying the words as she commanded herself steady.
Faithfully.
His old smirk returned, the flecks of topaz soothing the blazing gloom from his eyes.
Conspiring with a fallen sage to bring down my forces is how you show your devotion.
She slowly shook her head, baffled.
I've spoken to no one. Nothing I wouldn't wish you to hear.
The air hissed as he seethed it in between his bared teeth.
You think you can fool me, like I'm your simpering, lackey hero here to thank you for the privilege of following you around? I saw you conferring with Riju in the sanctum while her minions crafted the worst excuse for a distraction in the grand tradition of backstabbing.
He shirked away as the sense of control stilled his nerves, a cooling return of confidence.
And not 3 days later, our patrol caught the news. All those still loyal to the princess will rise.
You know he still fights for you. She stared past the frothing king, Hylia's words striking her dumb. Her cognizance of the plan was moot, a technicality on what they both knew she desired above all else.
After every indulgence and luxury I afforded you,
he went on, leering at her helpless dance.
You still think, you're still convinced, that you can ever escape me.
Laughter crinkled his voice as he fell into a leisurely pace about the chamber.
We'll fire straight into Newcastle town and take out as many of these rash fools as possible. When they breach the gates, they'll be trapped in the ringing sanctum. We'll burn them all alive. The stragglers will suffocate on the stairs, not even close to breaching this chamber. This is the highest tower, the safest spire, exactly where your clever ancestors would secure their king. Every last friend you have in this world, every idiot that holds a candle to the old Hyrule will be snuffed out.
He went on, the madness of his smile overtaking him.
I should thank you. Truly, we'll send exquisite flowers to Riju's funeral. As for you, sweet princess, I hope you were able to spruce this nest up exactly how you like it.
He stopped to lean close, an unexpected sourness on his breath, the scent of something rotting deep within.
You'll be bred here, and then you'll die here.
Her visceral disgust flared, and her wrists caught the bite of the straps, denying her the satisfaction of twisting her thumbs into his eye sockets.
That's really what you want for your oh-so-precious, destined heir?
She lobbed back.
To grow up without a mother? I hardly see how that matters,
he said.
Yours was rotting in the ground before you began school. Yet here you are, still able to do the one thing you're any good for. Children are so resilient, aren't they?
She cried out, a sharp sound, frightening to her own ears at the mention of her mother. Her fading mother, dying once again in Zelda's dimming memory. The gauzy recollections that remained were oversaturated with time and couldn't come into focus any longer. The few scenes and flashes had played through her mind too many times, so that they now flittered through her fingers, nothing but tattered fragments, one touch away from dust.
Besides, Zelda,
he went on, standing back tall, methodically spooling a single scarf from his hip.
You're unwell. That was quite the frightening scene you unleashed this afternoon. Shouting down guards, pacing like a rabid animal. And that little handmaid of yours, I'm sure she'd love to sing to all who'd listen about just how volatile you were during her tenure.
Of course. Ellie's life was spared out of the slim possibility of leverage. And here she'd thought him merciful on the girl's brief life and foolish heart. She'd thought him capable of so many possible atonements, had convinced herself that the culmination of his desire was rooted in something beyond ego and hunger. It's how she slept beside him, night after night, soundly and resolute. Any move he'd made that she held as a glimpse into a shallow well of compassion or consideration was nothing more than an investment in another favor, another inch toward dominance of Hyrule's legacy and its fate.
Anyone could see you need a nice, long rest, especially in your condition.
His fingers traced the sweeping violin sculpt of her abdomen, a patronizing nuzzle that made her want to retch.
And childbirth is such a fraught, untidy business. You just never know when things will go awry. But there's little need for used-up playthings when we'll have the promise of the future.
Her mouth opened to scream, met with the drowning crumple of silk scarf jammed between her teeth, swallowing up the sound.
Then again, 9 months can be terribly taxing on the mind,
he murmured, patting the frayed gold of her hair.
There might not be anything left of you to destroy. I'll be so curious to find out. It's been a fascinating year of controlling you, pet. But breaking you? That's a new, delicious game entirely.
He stood back to admire his prey before reaching around for the bottle of warm amber bourbon next to his chair, emptying 2 fingers into the single crystal glass.
Your golden era of peace is here,
he mocked, meandering to the window to watch the distant advance.
However should we celebrate, my queen?
He stood, his back to her, unthreatened and unwound. She was subdued and defeated, as threatening as a deer bleeding out in a glen. The delight as he ignored her to track the swarm of his enemies was palpable. The trifling amusement of leaving her dangling between one anguish and another, elastic swaths of time bound to nothing but his whims. It was in this torment of silence that she heard the hum. That pulsing, radiating glow of the master sword's blade, the trophy plucked from Link's lifeless body, a mounted accessory on the wall, just as she was. She could feel the warmth of spirit calling her, crying out through time and space and destiny, waiting. What was delivered? She pulled herself up on tiptoe, the pain searing into her toenails, and she stumbled back. Her slippered feet didn't rouse attention. The sight of ragtag, hopeless masses creeping up Hyrule Field was much too enthralling. In the wobble, her ankle tapped the bucket, the one he had filled with those warm stones by the fire. Carefully, she ushered the vessel forward between her heels, letting it tip soundlessly onto the hearth.
So many fins,
he narrated from the window.
A shame that feckless new lord I promoted didn't have the scales to keep them in check. Useless carps headed the way of the Zonai. They told me that Yona begged for her life at the very end. I'd have expected more from her, with that very willful, very dead husband. Such an unusual, pathetic scene to imagine, but you missed so many of those glorious, tiny moments of victory from the top.
He swiveled his wrist, whirling the whiskey before taking a long, luxurious gulp while savoring his rapidly advancing targets.
What fortunes I wouldn't spend to have glimpsed the moment Link realized that he'd never see you again. Duck like a pig, bleeding out just long enough to comprehend his failure at the one single edict of his damned existence. Who was he feeling worse for when the light went out of his eyes? Himself, or his ruined princess?
Her feet elevated those extra inches. She thrust her chest forward, arching her neck up to meet the razor-honed tip of the blade. The master sword cleaved through the gloom-laced settings, and accursed gold bound to her throat like fine sand, sending the jewels clattering to the floor. Blinding and surging, vengeful and true, Zelda's dormant light swallowed up the room. Chapter End Notes. Suggested track, https YouTube.b Sheer Error Forber Merkei Sign 46 www Kairuk Kidogi 54b. End of chapter.